All right, so today we have a very special guest. She brings to us a wealth of knowledge on the fundamentals of real estate, from architecture to development, project management, and more. So we're really excited to have you here. Antonia, welcome to the Build Up.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, ladies. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today.
Of course, we're very excited to speak with you as well. And, your introduction and your background to real estate is really fascinating. I loved learning that you're from Colombia, right? So I'm from Guyana as well in South America. I was born there. But also your parents are real estate developers, so you're from a real estate family. So talk to us about what that experience was like growing up in a real estate family and how that ultimately led you to pursue a career in real estate.
Yeah, well, I think it was, so my parents were developers in Colombia, and then my parents were divorced when I was really young. I don't remember them together. And then I moved to the US when I was 9 with my mom. So that experience of sort of the family in real estate was somewhat limited to that, but it was something that was around all the time. And then later on, my mom and also my dad continued to work in real estate. My mom also continued to work in real estate for with other companies. And so it's just always sort of been in the air. It's kind of like the idea of making a building and contributing kind of to the place where you live. So that has really been the experience with it, very generally. Obviously, there were specific things about it that called my attention. And from when I was little, I always liked to draw. So that was one of the ways that I kind of came into it through design and architecture. And ultimately, I realized that what I really liked was managing the projects and being on the ownership side. So slowly made my way there and where we are now. But yeah, I think just growing up and kind of understanding the possibilities and seeing how these teams come together to make these buildings has sort of always been there. So that's definitely something that has always been a part of my life.
That's so interesting. And I think that, the way that we grow up, and that's why we always like to talk about that, because it has such an impact obviously on who we are today. And I know that another really formative experience that you talk a lot about was when you were in high school and you went to the robotics program, and it seemed to leave like a really big impression on you. And I know that it's something that probably could be its own whole conversation, but if you really had to distill it down, what would you say was one of the biggest lessons that you learned from that program that you still now apply to your real estate business?
I mean, I think realizing that there isn't just one component to it. It's not just the design. It's not just the construction. It's basically coming together. And one of the interesting things about that program was that I was part of it when I was in high school, but later on, I also coached under the same program. And so you get to see sort of more the back end of it and the intention behind it. And a lot of the intention behind it is sort of the business of it, right? Like you have these big group of kids who need to spend a bunch of money building this thing, and then you need to get them to competitions across the country. So it was there's also the grant writing and the finding the funds and the fundraising, and how do you do that in a way where you can teach the students to do that kind of work. And that was super meaningful. So I think it's been really looking back and realizing that from early on, it's like, okay, you have this final product, like this robot, and it's supposed to do these very specific things. And it's not just about building the robot. It's about so much more. Like so much has to happen behind the scenes, and it takes a very large group of people. So I think for me, and the way that I look at development and the way that I've looked at my company now, it's in that sense, it's very similar. It's like you're building this physical thing that you have a proof that you've done it, but it requires this very large group of people sort of all rowing in the same direction. So I think that would be the main thing that I'd say is the big lesson there early on.
100%. There's a lot of parallel, as you describe it, the team that's needed and how it's, beyond what the actual end product is. It's so much greater than that. So that's a really great experience that you had. And you can see how it's really paralleled nicely for your business today. So that's really, really, really fascinating. And, just kind of going back a bit to, we've had a bunch of guests on the show who are also immigrants. Malessa's one. I come from an immigrant family, and even though you came here relatively young, you still are, an immigrant, and your mom came with you. So, what do you feel really, helped or hurt you having an immigrant mentality as a business person today?
I mean, I think there's a little bit of that, adaptability that you have. Let's say, when you speak a different language at home, or you grow up culturally slightly differently at home than you do at school, you get a lot of practice in sort of that code switching and that empathy that it requires to walk into situations that sometimes are very stressful. So I think that in one sense, that's been extremely helpful. Obviously, the immigration process, anyone that's gone through it can tell you, it can really set you back. It's very costly. It's very time consuming. It's tedious. So, and I've spoken a little bit about that on other podcasts about, how crazy that process is. So I would say the process itself set me back in terms of time and the experiences and the things I was able to do. But also having that adaptability that you need from early on has been a really great asset. It's really something that I rely on all the time. You walk into situations that are new, or you walk into situations that are complex, and being able to very quickly say, okay, this is how we're solving it, and this is who we are in the problem solving is a really great skill to have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't relate more. I think, just having that immigrant background and sort of that mentality, I think, is just super important, especially in business, like you mentioned as well. So, I mean, there are pros and cons, but I think if I am reflecting on it as well, I do think there's a lot more pros. Just having a different perspective, right, coming in. And going back to you did mention that, throughout your career, you've had different exposure to real estate, right, from development, architecture, and project management, which we'll get to soon. But, you had your start in architecture. So what was it about that really drew you in?
It's interesting because I think for me, architecture was never about architecture. It was more about, I wanted to build buildings. And so I always felt like I kind of grew up with the idea, especially with, growing up with parents who were in real estate when I was very young, the idea that the architect was super important. That was always sort of a thing that I grew up with. And I think it's just also the way that we manage design and construction, in Latin America, is a little bit different than it's managed in the US. And the architect plays a super important role, I would say much bigger than in the US. So I kind of always had that, if you want to build buildings, you got to be an architect. And it just made sense to me, right? If you want to build a building, you should know how to build it. And it
does make sense.
So it was naive. It was I just didn't know any better, right? And it's actually proven to be extremely, extremely useful and a pretty good edge, because I have realized that a lot of people who get these buildings built don't actually know how to build. And that's how they end up hiring me. But that's sort of where I came into it from. It was less about the art and that kind of thing. And obviously once I was in it, I love the aesthetic aspect of it, and I love architecture, and there's a lot about it that the sensibility is still there, and I really like drawing, and I love design. But that was not why I went into it. I went into it because I wanted to build buildings.
Yeah, I think that's something as well we relate with, because, we're real estate agents here in New York City, and Malessa and I got into the industry separately, but both for the same kind of reason, which was that we wanted to be investors and we wanted to learn how to invest in real estate. And for us, brokerage seemed like the path to it. Of course, like you said, there's so many paths to being a developer, to being an investor. This was the path that we took, but it wasn't so much we got into brokerage because that was the end goal. It was more of learning about real estate and then seeing that as a path towards it. And like you, once we became agents, we realized we really enjoyed the brokerage side and still pursue investments, but have connected with the brokerage side a lot. And so we definitely relate with kind of how you had a different end goal and use that as a way to get there. But when you did graduate from, your graduate program at MIT, which is very impressive, by the way, you came to New York City and you worked for a really large architecture firm. And, it sounds like you had a really robust experience. So can you share a little bit about what types of projects you were working on there?
Yeah, I was extremely lucky. I think both in terms of the timing of when I started working in New York, because New York was coming back. It was 2012. I think we were kind of over the 08, 09 situation. So there were a lot of new jobs and a lot of excitement around it and a lot of work and also a lot of, and this was the case for where I went to work in New York. During the 08, 09, they had not hired anybody. And I think they had laid off a lot of people. And so they were a little bit smaller than they would have normally been. And that meant that if you were on the younger side and a recent hire, you basically got a lot more exposure than you would have otherwise. So, and that was just fortunate from the timing perspective. But then also, I think I had an attitude that I would work on anything. Like people were like, hey, we have this deadline. We have this impossible thing. Nobody wants to work on it. Do you want it? I'm like, yes. So I had that. And I was fortunate to work with every single one of the principals there while I was there, which was also an unusual experience because it's somewhat divided. Obviously, there's the sort of the more urban design, campus design side, and then there's the more new construction side and new development side. And they don't necessarily work on there. It's not the same team. You got a completely different team of people. So that was a very fortunate situation. And also I got very lucky with the people. You know, they gave me the opportunities. I said, I want this. And they were like, sure, let's give you a shot. So in that sense, like it was a fantastic experience to start. It was a great introduction to New York. I got to learn a lot about the buildings and the place and the people and the environment of development. And from like you get to be in the room and people don't realize you're in the room. And so you get to learn a lot in that sense if you're paying attention. And I made sure to be paying attention while I was there. So it was an incredibly fortunate experience. Again, with the timing and the people and the opportunity, it was wonderful. So my experience in architecture in New York couldn't have been any better.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot about, being fortunate and like good timing and just kind of luck of the draw, but it also sounds like you took advantage of that opportunity in front of you. Like it's success as opportunity meets preparation. And in your case, like you were hungry, you were willing to take the jobs that other people didn't want. And that's something that, we sometimes see as lacking, in our experience is that like the next wave of agents, sometimes like, I don't want to work on anything under $1 million, and it's like, well, that's not how it works. You have to be willing to do anything. And
I was also going to add too, like, I think, you mentioned that the principals, they gave you these opportunities, but I think they sense a drive, right? And they had to have trusted you, which, obviously you have to earn that. So I do think that, I think you were just being a little humble, but
well,
you definitely.
They knew I would get it done. And I think it was like the breadth of the work too, right? I have a master's degree from MIT in urban design, but also I have a professional degree in architecture from the University of Miami. So I did all kinds of stuff we did work on Grand Central Terminal. I also got to work on some, ground up development projects for big developers as part of BBB's team, obviously. We got to work on massive RFP. We did Seward Park while I was there, and that was an awesome experience. Shop Architects was involved. We got to work with 3 different developers. We got to work on, I worked on a very cool project where we kept a historic facade and then we built a new building behind it and above it. And I got to see that project very closely because I did the construction administration for it. So, and that's just like a tiny bit of what I got to do. But yeah, people trusted me that I would get it done. And I feel like figuring it out. And again, that adaptability that comes in where you're just in a situation where it's brand new and and you have that curiosity to ask, like, hey, teach me how to do this. Hey, show me how to do this. And again, the studio environment was really great at that because you had someone who was more senior, who was more experienced, sitting a couple desks away. And if you just had to get up and walk over there. And most people were extremely generous with their time and in showing you, like, hey, this is how you properly read the drawings, and this is how you properly do this detail. And so overall, that experience really met that adaptability, and it was really great for me. It was a very good learning opportunity for sure.
It sounds like it. And at some point, though, you eventually left and you went in-house to work for a developer, which sounds like it was a very different experience in a way. We here in New York State work with a lot of real estate developers. That's kind of what we specialize in, is, representing, condos or rental buildings. And so we know that it can sometimes be tough to work with developers, depending on who it is, of course. And so, how did you kind of overcome that new challenge of now being in-house with a development firm? And it sounds like, at times it was not as maybe welcoming as maybe the architecture firm had been.
Yeah. I think it was different. Obviously, like the size of the team was very different, right? We went from this very large, very supported team. You had all kinds of resources and you had a lot of sort of historical information that people could share, and to an environment that was much smaller. It was a much tighter team, fewer people, and I think just a very different mission, if you will, sort of a different perspective. And I think, again, like, I was very lucky in architecture, because there are also many architecture firms that are incredibly difficult environments, but also it depends on your own personality. So I think some people will thrive in the difficult environments, and again, difficult varies, right? Things could be difficult in different ways. So I think for me, a lot of it was just, again, for that agility in personality that I have, and that adaptability of, like, wanting to move quickly, wanting to learn. That was much harder for me in an environment where that was not really anybody's priority except for mine. So it was difficult sort of getting to these moments where you're trying to find out more and trying to learn more, and realizing that opportunity does not exist. You're there to do the work, and it's sort of, you do the work that you're supposed to do. And other than that, like, there's not a lot of room for you to ask questions or to be or to say, or to take that much more initiative. I think initiative is seen very differently by different groups of people. And some people welcome it, and some people say, hey, this is going to make us better as an organization. And some people are going to say, oh, no, you're going to stand out, and we don't want that. So I think it was more about that that was the difference. And that was tough for me, right? And again, like, that's such a personal and specific thing. Like, some people people thrive perfectly well in those situations. No initiative is required. I just go in, I do my job, I go home, and I don't have to go beyond. And that works fine for some. But obviously it was very different. So, and also too, for me, there was a lot, when I worked in architecture, there was a lot more of that team mentality, and especially when we had a super strong leadership, where if someone made a mistake in the team, it was like the team lead would step in and own it, right? He would say, oh, this is our mistake, and I'm going to help fix it, and we'll figure it out. And it was just, in development, that was not at all. In development's like, whose fault is this? And it's sort of a very different approach where, and it's not about not being accountable for your mistakes or for the work that you do, but it's just really more a matter of how you lead. And so my specific experience was where the leadership was just completely different. And obviously when you're very ambitious, and you actually want to learn, and you want to do things better, and you want to stand out, it's going to be a tougher environment.
Yeah, we relate to that because, Candice and I, we actually met on a different team. And I think for a big reason for us leaving and starting our own team was just we really love forward momentum, right? And that's what you're talking about. When you have the drive and you want to do more for yourself, but you feel like you're being a little stifled, you kind of want to move on and do things your way, right? And I know in 2017, you started MADDPROJECT, right? Which is a project management and consulting firm. So, you talked about working with different types of people and different, really having really good experiences. So what motivated you to want to start your own company?
I mean, partly it was that, I think there's a lot of, when people, when you're surrounded by people who are not your people. And I think that's just life, right? You're going to have moments where you're in a situation where you're just like, I don't feel great here. A lot of people could just complain about it and say, hey, life's unfair and there's bias and there's whatever. And you can go down that road and not get very far. For me, that's really not the attitude that I prefer. I would rather say, hey, this doesn't seem like the right thing for me. Let me go do the right thing for me. And I think, thankfully that experience, and I will say like that my experience is in working for big shops, because I worked for the first developer I worked for, and then I worked for a different developer doing hospitality work across the country. Both experiences were extremely educational. I definitely got a ton of technical knowledge and understanding of how things work. And I also made really great relationships with other kinds of team members, like architects, other developers, contractors. And so I had sort of this really good base to start my own thing and to do things in a way that I felt were a better way to do things, right? I always tell people that in our line of work, it can be very stressful and it can be a lot of money, and it could, be a lot of other people's money, which is very stressful, even extra stressful. But at the same time, we're not curing cancer, we're not saving lives, and keeping the perspective on the importance of things and treating the team around you accordingly is, for me, a priority. We all work really hard, and the work is really stressful sometimes, and it's very demanding. But at the same time, like, we all have things that are more important than that. And I will say, like, I have weeks where, and I own my own business. And so for me, I love what I do, and I put in a lot of hours a week. I work really hard. So it's not that I'm a slacker and I'm just like, oh. And the people who work with me also put in a lot of hours, work really hard. We're on a plane a lot of the time. So it's not that we don't work hard, but it's honestly that we have families. We have things that we like to do. We're human beings. And I think that recognizing that just makes us better at the work. 100%. Makes it easier to relate to other people in our teams, the people we hire to be our consultants, to be our architects. It's just better.
Yeah. 100%. I think when you're coming up in a career and you're ambitious, like it sounds like we all are here, you're trained that it's all about, how hard you can work. And then, you get into this mindset that vacations are bad and balance is bad. And then, you go to this extreme place. But I think as we all get older and we all now start our own businesses, you learn that balance is really important. It makes you more effective at what you do. People also respect that boundary because they themselves, as the client, have families and have other things, as well. And as long as you build trust and you deliver results, it's really important. And that's something that, speaking for myself, I had to learn later in my career. But there's also a time and place for everything too. And so, I think that we've all paid our dues. And so that's a really, great point that you bring. And I also liked how you talked about, the way that you treat the people that you work with is super important, having that integrity. And that's very, that's also very important to us. And, we've now aligned ourselves with clients and service providers that think alike, like you said, like finding your people. And it just makes working so much better because it's always going to be stressful. But if you have good people around you, everyone's treating each other with respect, then, you're already ahead of the game. And so, That's really great insights. And, we did briefly mention, what your company does, but for those who are less familiar, can you share a little bit about, the work that you do?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I started a project management fee development company. We do work nationally. So normally we work with family offices or new developers who don't necessarily know the process, and we bring them through it. We either do full on, turnkey project management, or if they want, we can come in during specific times of the project and sort of help them out in the things where they need help. The idea for me to start my company was that we would grow to a point where I had an established team, established clients, and a pretty good balance sheet, to the extent where I could go on and do my own development work in Manhattan. And we're there. It took us about 4 years, but earlier this year, I've personally partnered with somebody who comes from the finance side, and we are starting to look at deals in New York, and it's been a really great process, but it's also been very patient in setting ourselves up in a way where, we don't have to do anything stupid for money. We have a working team. We know how to get through the process. We have the relationships, and we're going for it. So that's really what we do. And just because we have sort of the, MAD Project development, which is now in New York, MAD Project nationally, we're still doing work. We're still taking on new clients. We're still finishing up the projects that we've been working on for a couple of years. And we will continue doing that because it's a big part of keeping kind of our team sharp and our team ready. And so we're very excited to sort of see this new chapter in New York. But yeah, for anybody who's doing any hospitality or multifamily work across the country and needs help, like, we have an exceptional team, and we do work everywhere. I think we've worked at this point in like 35 different jurisdictions across the country. So we're very familiar and, again, adaptable to different environments, and we've done pretty good work. I would say something like 70, I was looking at the numbers the other day, but something like 70% of our clients are repeat clients at this point.
Wow.
So
That's great.
These projects take a long time. So for a repeat client to come back around, it's like years.
Right.
Yeah. So it's,
well,
it's
congratulations.
great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. That's huge, right? You've accomplished a lot. And of course, our platform is national, but we do have a bias for New York City. So we're very excited to hear that you're here. And you've accomplished a lot, right? And throughout your real estate career. So what would you say is your superpower in real estate or business in general?
I think, it is that, I think the adaptability in the situations, and sort of that translates into a lot of empathy for the people that we work with and that we meet. And again, like, empathy isn't necessarily agreeing with everyone. It's more like being able to see the world from a different perspective and knowing that the way you see things is not the only way. And I think that takes you really far in terms of putting together really good teams. And it also takes you really far negotiating really hairy things with people. And I think in general, it makes you much more open to new opportunities. So I think that those are all really the things that have pushed my work forward.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. Empathy is a really important part of everything. And the more you can understand people, the better business you can really run. And, a lot of the people, our audience here on the show, they're new to real estate or thinking about getting into real estate. So someone who's seen a lot in our industry and accomplished a lot, what advice would you give to someone who's an inspiring architect or developer?
Yeah. I mean, I think both those fields, architecture and development, they're very wide. There are a lot of different opportunities within both of those fields for all different kinds of personalities. And I think it takes a little bit of knowing yourself and saying, like, hey, I'm really good at this one thing. Recognizing that perhaps if you find yourself in an environment that is not the right environment, to say, hey, you know what, like, there's this other thing that's going to be better for me. I think, this is sort of advice I just sometimes give young people who message me or who people send my way, but find the things that you're really good at it's a little bit less about find the things you love. I would say it's find the things you're really good at, and then you'll love those things eventually. Because when you find the thing that you're really good at and you could really stand out, you can position yourself to then go for the things that you want that are bigger, which is really like what I've done with my company. But when you look back at sort of every step has really been about that positioning. Is how do you get yourself in a situation where you can shoot for the next thing, and strongly too, like not out of desperation or out of necessity. I think we all face moments where there's that sort of necessity. There's adversity, that's life. And that attitude of like, you make the most out of it. Don't just have that attitude when those moments come, but have that attitude all the time. And I think that pairs really well with find the things that you're good at, because that's what's going to help you make the best out of all of it all the time.
100%. I think that's an excellent note to leave on. Thank you so much, Antonia. I mean, your outlook to business in general, obviously real estate is very inspiring, and we love your journey. And so thank you for taking the time to share that with us, with our audience. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really enjoy this conversation.
Well, and congratulations to you too. It's really great you're doing this, and I'm very excited that you reached out and asked me to be a part of it.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. We work with Brown Harris Stevens and many other top real estate firms, staging their homes to sell quickly and at the highest price possible. Our staging is affordable without sacrificing quality or design. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
That was a really good conversation with Antonia. I really enjoyed, hearing her speak. Her story is just really inspiring, and, just like she immigrated just like I did. So that was really nice to have that mutual connection, right? And experience, yeah. And I think she's just really inspiring, all that she's doing. And, it's just, again, really strong woman in real estate, which
we love to see.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that.
Exactly. But actually, let's talk a little bit now about what renters are really looking for. And I think it may surprise a lot of developers and a lot of people out there that it's actually not amenities. People think it's always the amenities that is what renters want, but it's actually a little bit more simple than that.
Okay. Well, that was interesting to learn too, because if you remember in that episode with Airbnb, that was actually the best part of it. So it was interesting to know that people who are living there full time, they don't really value amenity as much, but on their getaway, they kind of want to, tap into that.
Which makes sense,
right? It makes sense, yeah. So, but a new survey came out, and they're saying that only 11% of renters in the Dallas-Fort Worth area are considering Zoom rooms, walking trails, and other expensive perks to be their top priority. In fact, 1 in 4 renters saying that's the least of their priorities.
Yeah, it's really much more simple. It's space allocation and location. So 31% are prioritizing space and 30% are putting location at the top of the list. So together, that's about 60% of the total pool, right, that was polled. So together, that really reflects the majority of renters out there are looking for the way in which the interior of the home is being utilized, as well as, location, which is the number one rule in real estate.
I mean, that makes sense, right? A location is super important. Even personally, when you're looking, like that is something that, is the top of the list. And when we're working with renters and home buyers as well, that is oftentimes the top of their list as well. So in this survey, the tastemaker renters, they call them, who are, focused on amenities, only make up 18% of the market. Most renters, 82% in fact, are focused on utilitarian needs like cost, safety, and proximity to work, especially when you're now back to, the office.
Yeah, speaking of costs, things like the rental costs and fees associated with a particular building is actually one of the number one decision drivers once people have now narrowed it down, right? They're looking for location, the way space is used. And now once they've found a few things that they like, they're now looking at things like the cost. That took the number one spot with 32%, followed by safety and security, which was 27%. So these are the main two decision driving factors renters amongst their top choices. And then, of course, the proximity to work was another big one, but it was only 10% only 10% considered that their number one priority. And that makes sense because with hybrid work, it's not as critical as it was before.
That makes sense. And even like amenities like, dog walking services, gyms, resident lounges, all of that, they're important to some people, but they're just not the deal makers. Less than 5% of renters said those were their top priorities. So it just shows like the fundamentals, like you said, just safety, proximity to work, and location. Those are really the top factors.
But here's the interesting part. Despite studies like the one you're referencing showing how the number of renters who prioritize all of these amenities is so small, developers are still insistent that they need those amenities to really attract renters. So, for example, Blake Taylor from JPI mentioned that the top tier features of their projects, like resort-style pools and race car simulators, they all create a sense of community and they enhance the overall quality of life. So that's something that they're still steadfast on incorporating into their buildings.
That's really interesting. I think it's more of a marketing tool, and a lot of renters too, they feel like they need it, but once they are in the building, they don't really use it.
It's like they want to know it's there.
Exactly.
But then if you ask them, how much time have you been in the race car simulator? They're like, I've never used that.
Never.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in a building with a pool, which is a pretty standard, not standard, but, something that people use a lot. Popular is the right word. And I never used it. And I was like...
I know. It's always there. And I'm like, it looks nice to know that you have it. But yeah, so I agree.
So, but one thing that both renters and developers agree on is a dedicated space for work. Now, whether that's a more communal residence lounge co-working space in the building or within the apartment itself, having a dedicated work area, home office area, 55% of the renters that were surveyed said that a dedicated workspace was a key interior feature. And of course, we know that we've exhausted that topic as to why, but again, it's just helpful to, recapture really what's important to renters.
Especially post-COVID, right? I think just us working with buyers and renters as well, we've seen this come up. So we strongly agree with that. It's really nice to have that space. Like you mentioned, because of work from home, but also too, like, I think it's a nice amenity to have regardless, right?
Yes.
To just have a reprieve from your home. Sometimes you want to take a break, you want to go downstairs and in the lounge. And
Change of scenery,
exactly.
Mm-hmm. And then in some of the older building communities, what we're seeing is developers are now repurposing some of the common spaces to dedicate to a co-working space. So they can't necessarily redesign the interiors of their homes, but what they can do is add an amenity or repurpose a common area to then, allow for more flexible work from home space for their residents.
Well, that's good that, developers in general are listening to what, the demand is, right? Because a lot of times with these older buildings, sometimes they just kind of go with the flow and they have a steady demand. But it's nice to know that they're listening and they're incorporating these amenities.
No, it definitely. It's clear that renters are looking for something that's affordable, that's close to work and very functional. And then from there, an added sense of community is definitely a nice to have, but not a must have. And so, overall, that's where amenities have kind of fallen in the list of priorities for renters.
Well, definitely. It's all about balance. And it's great that, developers are listening. It's nice that this survey was done. So it's giving real-time feedback from renters.
Definitely.
Well, that wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in as we dig into what renters are really looking for.
Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more insights on the ever-evolving world of real estate. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice.
For specific recommendations, please consult with your financial, legal, or tax professional.
Always leaves your text on red. Leaves your text on red.
Built the corporate group with $1,000 loan.
Tell us a little bit about how you actually came from.
Welcome to the build-up, John Roa.
Thanks for having me.
We're coming to you here from Studio 1873.
It's not 57% over. 70 million.
So then, cheers.